Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to Briefings Direct. We're all now part of a massive worldwide experiment about the very definition of work. Remote, in office, or tightrope walking along some sliding scale between the two. How each business and each worker finds the next new work-life balance remains an ongoing work in progress. In the rapid post-adoption of remote work world, a full 2.5 years after the onset of COVID, there's no definitive answer on what approach to hybrid work works best. The technology, tools, and solutions, many designed for an earlier in-office era, are not necessarily up to the task. The perceptions and preferences of bosses and workers alike are in a seemingly unending transition. Nothing quite seems to fit the new, still to be defined purpose. So what is the eventual end state of hybrid work? Will the process of finding it provoke new forms of innovation, opportunity, and technological success? Or will productivity and work-life balance suffer amid a period of tension, power plays, and years of seesaw approaches of trials and error around hybrid work? Stay with us now as we explore the drivers and opportunities to get the future of hybrid work right, and perhaps sooner rather than later. To learn more about what makes hybrid work move to an arc of opportunity and not wallow in a trough of complexity and confusion, please join me now in welcoming our guests. We're here with Amy Hayworth, founder and CEO of Nobody Makes It Alone. Welcome back, Amy.
Hey, thanks, Dana.
We're also here with Tim Minahan, Executive Vice President of Strategy at Citrix. Good to have you with us, Tim.
Thanks, Dana. Excited to be part of the dialogue.
Amy, there seems to be an interminable debate going on nowadays about the future of work. The previous models don't give us a lot to easily fall back on as precedent. Companies are struggling to find the models that work best for them and their employees. So are most workers to be fully remote, mostly in the office and the 9 to 5, 5 days a week model of yesteryear? Or will there be some yet to define golden mean or equilibrium of sorts between these two sides of the equation?
Dana, such a good question. I'm so glad we're having this conversation because you're right. Companies are struggling. We're seeing headlines every day about which employees are being called back into the office full time, sort of the reaction amongst certain groups as they hear what's become a top-down mandate about how things are going to work. Certainly that's been the trend. You know, companies are trying to figure this out. Do they work fully remote? If they do go hybrid, are they mandating a certain number of days in the office versus allowing employees the flexibility to choose that? And I love what you said about the arc of opportunity and in comparison to that trough of complexity. And it feels like that is almost becoming the choice. Which companies are going to hang on that this is the arc of opportunity versus those that are returning to what they perceive to be something more certain, which really is that model of yesteryear. So I was really interested. Citrix just did a global survey and the results to me are fascinating because what they did is they started by asking employees what they preferred. And what the data showed us was that 57% of employees said they prefer hybrid models that allow them to work remote or in the office. And 69%, that's a big number. 69% said they're going to leave their job if they aren't given the option. So what this tells us is from an employee point of view, that demand for flexibility is clearly there. And I hope companies are going to realize, if they haven't already, that to truly attract and retain talent for the long term, they're going to need to figure out how to make this choice an option and make it a permanent part of that workforce strategy.
Right. And looking at some of these findings from studies at Citrix and other places, it seems to me that the hybrid model that was sort of foisted on us does work for many people. I've seen that 69% of the hybrid workers surveyed say they feel productive compared to 64% of remote workers and 59% of in-office employees. So that flexibility is paying off for them from their perception. Also, nearly 70% of hybrid workers say they feel engaged compared to a much lesser degree, 55 or so percent of remote workers and 51% of in-office employees. So why is there tension? Why do we have, in a sense, this need to return to the past when the current state seems to be working for many people?
I think there's an interesting dynamic that I'm starting to sense. Typical human behavior is that in times of great uncertainty, the human brain tends to latch on to that which feels certain. And so even if we think about the macro environment outside of just work, the uncertainty level, we thought we had hit our high during 2020 when COVID really peaked. But what's just come at us is more and more uncertainty. So one hypothesis that I have is that this is an organizational reaction to try to control what feels controllable in one sense. But there's a real watch out here because the impact on outcomes and results and the cost is really going away from driving outcomes and accountability within the ethos of an organizational culture and going backwards to say, this is how we work, almost like a parental, this is how it's going to be, top-down ruling. But the cost of this to workers is that it's going to come in the form of well-being, both the physical and mental. When we look at the results from the survey we've been talking about, 70% of hybrid workers say they have a strong emotional connection to their organization and leadership team. That's compared to 60% of fully remote workers and 58% of in-office employees. Similar numbers when it comes to well-being. 70% of hybrid workers report good well-being, and that's compared to 61% of remote workers and 60% who are only in the office. And what just struck me about all these numbers is in-office employees scored lower across all these categories: productivity, engagement, emotional connection, and well-being. And I think we really need to pay attention both to what's not working and also to dive into what is, because clearly something is working across all these domains for the hybrid worker. And that's really important because being inspired by our work, we know, is what drives performance. It drives commitment. It drives loyalty. It drives innovation. And so organizations need to be asking the big question, not necessarily which model is right, but which drives the best outcome for our organization and our people. And from there, we can figure out how to make this work.
So, Tim, given these findings, why are so many companies still resisting flexible and hybrid work models? It seems as if what we saw over the past year and a half is backtracking. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, Dana, people like to label a lot of things, right? It's not a remote work issue. It's not a return to office issue. It's not a quiet quitting issue. What we have here is a trust issue. Despite clear findings from countless studies, from Citrix, from PwC, Journal of Economics, countless others, showing that remote work yields measurable improvements in productivity and retention, leaders, including those that tend to pride themselves on being, quote, data-driven, are just ignoring the facts, and they're pushing employees to return to the office. In fact, our latest research at Citrix finds that nearly half of managers, despite all the evidence and experience they had in their own companies during the pandemic, just don't trust employees to get work done when they're outside the office. In fact, 48% of managers in a recent study we did report implementing tracking software on their employees' machines to measure their keyboard time when working remotely. And so, I know, Dana, we've had conversations before and, on best practices for hybrid work. And during those, I warned that kind of the biggest risk to getting all the benefits that Amy talked about by embracing more of a hybrid work model was creating policies and culture and a tech stack that gave employees all equitable access to the applications, the information, as well as career advancement opportunities, regardless of where they work, in the office or remotely. And unfortunately, some leaders are now valuing face time over business outcomes. And researchers have labeled this dynamic as proximity bias. And at its core is really a lack of trust and outdated ways to measure employee contributions and engagement.
Well, I guess, of course, Tim, trust is something hard to measure in a data-driven world. Do you have any sense of how trust can be measured as yet another indicator that when you have trust and it's a two-way street, that productivity really is strong.
Well, I think the orientation is productivity. So some of those non-Citrix research efforts that I mentioned, one interesting one is the Journal of Economics. The researchers there ran an experiment in which they selected a unnamed NASDAQ-listed company. They randomly assigned call center employees to work from home and had the control group working in the office. And what they found was working from home not only resulted in a 13% increase in productivity, so those workers working remotely actually were more productive than those in the office, but a 50% lower attrition rate. When you think about dynamics like that, especially in the tight labor market that we have right now, there are very real business benefits and very real ways to measure the benefit of embracing a much more flexible work environment.
Amy, you've been coaching a lot of companies who are working to find the right balance. It's a time of constant and challenging change, as you pointed out. What in your mind is top of mind when it comes to the keys to success in enabling at least a path to successful hybrid work, even if you can't predict the end state necessarily?
I want to piggyback a little bit on this idea of trust that Tim brought up. What I'm hearing is trust and connection. And sometimes what we're going for and what we're trying to explain and what my clients are trying to explain, it is connection or trust. What is that secret sauce? And I think if we step back and we think about even our lives outside of work, what creates trust and connection between people? It far exceeds anything we're doing organizationally, but it can absolutely be put into our organizational structures. So just for a second, think about that. Why do you decide to trust someone? And most likely it's because you found a place, either of vulnerability where you've shared something and it's been reciprocated and held to be safe space, or you've connected because you found some sort of similarity. So what I'm seeing is organizations are having sort of this knee-jerk reaction because they're sensing that this idea of connection, which is fuel for trust, is missing somewhere. And so they're putting the workplace as the proxy for building that. The challenge really is in the last couple of years, we've distributed our workforce. So if we're using workplace as the proxy for connection making, we are leaving out in so many cases people who are not in the office anymore. And so that is one of the challenges with hybrid. If companies are mandating employees who have the option to be in an office, come into the office a certain number of days, they're actually going to start to find that unless they teach organizations how to create connections, that they're actually fueling disparity. And they need to really then be focused on across the board. How do we create connection? How do we make it okay to not have our meetings be all about getting things done? We know that this style of working drives productivity. We also need to be thinking about how can it drive connection, and not just for one group who has access to an office, but for everyone. So the key is really to help our organizations be successful, to name what it is that they're sensing is missing in their culture, and then to set up focused efforts to build that capability so that there is fairness, there is safety, there's belonging, and there's connection for everybody.
Yeah, Dana, if I could, just building on that, and Amy and I have had this discussion before in the past, it really boils down to those companies that are most successfully leveraging this moment to create entirely new work models that benefit both their organizations as well as their employees are really boils down to delivering meaningful work, right? Giving employees the tools and information and assignments needed to drive innovation and creativity and business outcomes for the company, but purposeful office time. Certainly, there is a value in bringing employees together, that connectivity that Amy mentions, the ability to do strategic planning, the ability to collaborate in certain ways, the ability to meet with customers, the ability just to create social networks with your fellow employees so you see them as humans rather than bodiless faces on a video call. All of that has value. But for those companies that are figuring the secret sauce, the mantra boils down to providing meaningful work and purposeful office time.
When we're talking about meaning and trust, that strikes me as closer to a relationship rather than a transaction. Much of the technology has been developed around transactions. Technology is inherently transactional. So it seems to me that we need to look perhaps a little differently at technology as a way to increase the richness and value of the relationship between the employee and the employer. Amy, is that the case? Are we not using technology appropriately, or do we need to think differently about the use of technology to foster better relationships that lead to more trust that then deliver higher productivity?
I think technology has a huge opportunity to really be a catalyst in helping create connection in the way that we see and experience each other. At its core, it's human. And if we think, people need to be seen, they need to be heard. I think there's some exciting innovations when it comes to the tools that we're using. And even in, my world is more the HR stack, and starting to see the amplification of recognition tools, of coaching platforms, of new and exciting ways to learn that are leveraging more mobility and looking at how people want to work these days and meeting them where they are, rather than saying, here's the technology, you learn how to use it. It's, hey, we're learning how you want to work, and we're learning how you want to grow, and we'll meet you there. And so really seeing this uptick, at least in the HR tech space, of tools that acknowledge the humanness underneath the technology itself.
Yeah, and Dana, I would add that during the pandemic, we've introduced new tools to allow employees to execute work in the most efficient way possible and collaborate in a virtual sense, right? I really do believe we're getting to the point where the metaverse is now reaching the blending with the workplace, right? You think about some of the tools that companies had embraced during the pandemic out of necessity, certainly communication and collaboration platforms like Slack and Teams and Zoom, et cetera, but also tools that were emulating what we've become used to in a physical world and physical collaboration environments. Things like digital whiteboard tools, content collaboration tools, for redlining and sharing and all of that. And so right now, one of the top priorities for IT executives everywhere is creating the optimal hybrid work stack. And that stack has multiple different levels or layers to it, right? One certainly is the collaboration layer, like we talked about, right? How do I bring together all the collaboration tools necessary to allow employees to work effectively, execute work effectively, and collaborate effectively when working remotely or in a distributed way? The second layer certainly are the business applications that we've come to know and love. Some of our, whether it's our HR business applications, our supply chain applications, our financial applications, etc. Certainly, there is a major role in this distributed work environment for virtual application delivery and security, right? The need to access those mission critical apps remotely and have them perform the same way they should, and wrapping all of your applications, whether they're virtual, local, or SaaS apps, in a trusted access security layer. And then finally, the device layer, ensuring that employees can work across any device and location. And even more so now, I'll point to Citrix, bringing some of those virtual environments into your physical workspace. So right now, for example, we're retrofitting all of our conference rooms to be Teams-centric, so that no matter where anyone is working, they are part of a Teams-based collaboration, because we recognize that in most cases, our meetings are going to involve a hybrid model in which some employees and stakeholders are remote and some are physically in the office. And so we've retrofitted our environment with circular cameras so that everyone has an equal box on Teams, putting cameras on the whiteboard so that everyone can be part of every part of the conversation, have equal access to information. We're not alone in that. A whole host of our customers are examining those environments, right? Bringing that metaverse, if you will, into the workplace.
Now, Amy, even with all things equal of getting the right technology, it seems to me that there's another part of the equation. And remote organizations, some of them just foist this technology on people, and it remains the worker's job to be the integrator, to find the process among all the different applications. And I wonder if that is perhaps not the right way to go either. So this isn't just about all remote or all in office. It's how you do remote. And is there some lesson in your experience about how you deliver technology to people? And do you have to recognize that people are not systems integrators, and that the way that technology, application by application, SaaS login by SaaS login, isn't going to work if you don't provide some other value add to help people, I suppose, work with the technology rather than be overwhelmed by it.
So much so, Dana, that I really see a new hybrid stack emerging, which is going to be about unifying the work, making it secure without an employee needing to figure out how to make that happen, and really simplifying it. Because the last thing we want is for the employee to feel like they are part of the IT department. Being able to rely on our IT counterparts to do what they are best at, where employees across the organization being able to do what they're best at, which is to do the role, the skill that they were hired for. So employees are really going to be continuing to look for what unifies it. So there aren't 60 SaaS logins there, how they can work securely without carrying that burden themselves, and to make sure that work is really simplified, and where possible, machine learning or virtual assistants are augmenting what they're capable of. So guiding, automating the work so that the employee is really free from that friction or noise and can perform at their best.
Yeah. So Tim, we've been talking about how this impacts employers and employees, but how does this impact the IT people? It seems to me, based on what Amy said, that there might need to be a rethinking of IT along the lines of, instead of them being system support, they're actually work support, that they're in the business of helping people work.
You summed it up, Dana. IT's number one priority is creating a equitable, consistent, and secure work environment for their employees, right? So that employers and employees have the luxury of testing out these different flexible work models, right? Whether that involves, we talk a lot about where people work, and certainly allowing existing employees to have the flexibility to work remotely. But we just talked about how people work, ingraining new collaboration tools, new work execution tools, and new tools in the workplace to provide a seamless experience and involve everyone across these distributed teams to be able to collaborate and execute work efficiently. And then the last part is really a mission critical need today, and that's who does the work. One of the things we are failing to see now is prior to the pandemic, had a global shortage of medium to high skilled talent. In fact, McKinsey estimated that we had a shortage of 95 million medium to high skilled workers. And that was most acute in those most in demand skills necessary to digitize and advance and modernize your business. Well, that hasn't gone away. It's only gotten worse. But smart companies, having proven out the model of hybrid work or remote work, are now using that as a platform upon which to reconsider their workforce strategies, being able to tap into pools of talent, right? Blending contractors who might have a unique expertise around things like, multi-cloud or security or AI, and bringing them together with full-time employees in work groups that are connected by this hybrid work stack that IT is creating to optimize both productivity, experience, and employee engagement.
So, Amy, when we redefine the goal or the objective or the mission of IT and the business around getting work done in the best way and fostering the best relationships and trust between the players, it seems that where they're doing this becomes less relevant, and yet we're hung up on location or proximity bias, as Tim pointed out. Do we need to sort of shake the bush here a little bit and ask people why they're hung up on location instead of why they're not focusing on the quality and new definition of most effective work?
Absolutely, Dana. I think you're getting at the big challenge we're facing right now is, are we asking the right question? Are we solving for the right thing? I think one piece I keep going back to your arc of opportunity statement, is we need to be very realistic that massive disruption is going to continue in the world. companies are really going to need to figure out, to strategize, to plan and implement ways to build agility and create organizational and workforce structures, as well as IT structures that not only allow them to respond quickly to change, but actually allow them to thrive when they need to respond quickly to change. You know, at the heart of this, we talk about risk mitigation. And unless organizations are thinking about disruption as a potential risk, they're going to miss the mark. Putting more structure around where people work is the opposite of agility. What we really need to be thinking about is how do we leverage everything that we have learned in the last 2 to 3 years and allow it to be a foundation upon which to build versus take everything that we've learned and go back to 1992. So we need to be planning. We need to be strategic. We need to expect disruption. And then we really need to build the capability, both the technology capability as well as the human capability to thrive during disruption. And that means agility, even like what Tim said about who's doing the work. How can we ebb and flow? How can we make work feel more fluid? And we need to get away from trying to answer the wrong question, quite honestly.
Well, before we go to our crystal ball and try to predict how things are going to unfold, even in a very disruptive period in the next year or two, I'd like to look at this through a little bit of a different lens. We've been talking about sort of the softer metrics of productivity and trust, but there's also some hard metrics around economics. And as organizations look at their total cost of employee ownership, if you will, that has to include big office buildings in very expensive cities, or it has to involve hour-long commutes in each direction on public transportation that's probably aging and inefficient, or sitting in a car in traffic. Tim, are there some pure economic reasons why companies should be more open-minded when it comes to location? It seems to me that there's more than just productivity, that there's actually a bottom line indicator here that flexibility and hybrid work pays.
Yeah, absolutely, Dana. In fact, there were countless studies done during the pandemic and the like that, certainly indicated that there are real business benefits to remote work. You mentioned key ones, right, around real estate reduction. Despite companies looking to get employees back into the office in some cases, almost every employee is looking at right-sizing their real estate in new ways, particularly in major metropolitan areas. Secondly, you mentioned, commuting. Commuting certainly puts benefit back into both employers and employees' pockets if they're working remotely even part of the time and being able to reduce their expense, especially in light of, the current prices of gasoline and so on. But there's also major sustainability benefits as every company is looking to reduce their CO2 emissions, looking to really adopt things like cloud and reduce their real estate footprint and reduce the necessity for employees to do 2-hour commutes each way every day. Really opportunities there. But I do think when we go back to it, the real hard ones, I don't believe they're soft at all. The benefits around productivity and around business outcomes that employers are trying to achieve just can be accelerated and enhanced by embracing a much more flexible work model, whether that's securing those hard to find skills because you can reach them in a remote fashion. And good example is, a hospital network right here in the Boston area, Dana, that during the pandemic saw their telemedicine visits go up to over 200,000 per month from 9,000 per month. So a 27x increase. Well, guess what? Coming out of the pandemic, they're not rotating all the way back. They're increasing their telemedicine experience, but they also recognize they can use that same platform to find much in demand talent around things like oncologists, et cetera, and can staff them not in the Boston area where it's highly competitive and highly costly to hire them, but remotely in the Midwest or elsewhere. And these are the types of real business benefits that have come from people embracing much more flexible work models.
All right, Tim, let's look to that crystal ball. Now that we understand that there's a debate going on, we see headlines around certain leaders in large and influential businesses coming up to the plate to bat in favor of on-premises work. And of course, we have a lot of data that supports and rationales around economics and productivity that support hybrid and remote. So how do you see things playing out the year ahead? Are we going to continue to have this back and forth debate, or is there some end state that or settlement of this discussion?
I think that the natural market factors will balance it out. Employees, including those very top employees that want to do meaningful work, want to create, want to innovate, but want to do so in a much more self-serving, flexible work model, will kind of vote with their feet. We're already seeing it, as we've heard of the Great Resignation and the like. And despite the blustering at the top level around getting folks back into office, the reality is that companies are beginning to recognize the critical importance of employee experience. In fact, the study we just did of 10,000 IT leaders, 60% said they're investing more in internal innovation projects to improve the employee experience, investing in digital workspace technology to support consistent and reliable access to the applications and information employees need across any device and location, to ensure security. And so, in short, after years of investing to digitize and enhance customer experience, companies are now giving some much needed and long overdue attention to enhancing employee experience. Those responsible for innovating, for creating and improving customer satisfaction. And I think, the market's just going to balance itself out with companies making these investments in order to appear more attractive. And as part of that, it's not just about the hybrid stack for technology for hybrid work, but it's also about the policies and cultural changes you're going to need to make to support that hybrid work model to make you an employer of choice.
Well, how does this new stack shape up, Tim? What are some of the major components that people should be looking at and perhaps not turning their back, but maybe rethinking their approach to IT?
Well, I think we covered a good portion of that before, Dana. We see a number of layers to the stack. Certainly the newest one that's getting the most attention is the collaboration layer, right? The need to invest in new tools to foster greater work execution and collaboration in a distributed model. So those would be, things like a lot of the communication and collaboration tools that we use, like Teams and Slack and others. There'll be some of the new kind of turning physical work methods into digital work methods, like a digital whiteboard, like Miro, et cetera, and bringing those into your stack, where a few years ago they probably didn't really exist or weren't used at scale as they are now. The second layer is certainly, continuing to refine and modernize your traditional business application stack, right? All those tools you use to run your business, your ERP, your business applications, et cetera. So employees in functional layers can execute the work they need to get done, can execute those transactions. Certainly, there is rising importance of ensuring that you have virtual desktop and security layer in there, one in which allows you to continue to leverage those mission critical applications and virtualize them at scale to your employee base, whether they're full-time employees, contractors, the like, in a very quick and efficient means, and then wrapping that in a zero trust security layer. And then finally, the last layer is around certainly the devices, ensuring that employees can have equitable access to applications and information, regardless of what device they're using, regardless of what location they're accessing from.
And how about you, Amy? What's your crystal ball telling you about how things are going to shape up a little bit in the coming year or two?
I think there's going to be this realization that we need to continue to learn and we need to continue to experiment. What I would love to see happen is that organizations and employees both set that as the expectation. So rather than swing all one way at an enterprise level, that there are parcels, pieces, incubators for innovation when it comes to both technology and also when it comes to ways of working. And these incubators remain and they're generating insights, and those insights are fueling future decision making. I think one of the really important aspects of this is that we don't give up too soon. We have come so far, and what is taking place is a continuation of transformation. Transformation inherently means ambiguity. Humans don't love ambiguity, but rather than abandon and go back to where we felt certain back in 2019, and I say certain with clearly some air quotes around there. But rather than go back to that we push forward and we lean into these spaces of uncertainty, experiment, learn, try new things, innovate, solve real problems, and mostly that we don't give up, we don't abandon at this point.
And Amy, I always like to ask about examples and real life results. So when you look at the new stack as Tim described it, and from the number of organizations you've been working with, who's come up a little bit on an early adoption basis, understood the needs for this new stack, put in place some of these cross-cultural, improvements to foster trust in relationships? What's working? Who have you seen do this? Maybe you can name them, maybe you can't. But when you do this right, what do you get?
So there's a couple places that I'm seeing some best practices, and I love that idea of leaning into the bright spots. So rather than what's not working, let's talk about what is working. So one organization in particular is investing in their manager layer. Throughout the last 2-3 years, we've really heard how much middle managers have taken the brunt of supporting teams and people. And one organization in particular is investing in their managers at unprecedented levels because they've understood that employee experience really is manager experience, and they're seeing some really good results so far. They're early in the game. The other place to look is some of the startup community. When I think about those organizations that are building fresh right now and seeing what they're putting in place, seeing the choices they're making, both in the technology they're investing in and also in their workplace practices, there's a lot of good learning to be had there because they're looking at how are people motivated today. It's not, we have to bring everyone in for a learning event. Let's just say what this organization in particular that comes to mind is doing is they're thinking about how much being in the community and serving the community is fueling a sense of motivation and commitment, not only to the team, but to their work product, what their solution is overall. And so they're coming together with organizations in the community to do service together versus come together just for, strategic planning, not to undermine strategic planning, but getting out and about, seeing their impact in bigger ways is really fueling this sense of loyalty and commitment. So kind of some non-traditional ways, but really stepping back and saying, what do people need today? Where are we today? And being willing to let go of things that worked in the past in favor of something new and fresh.
And Tim, any examples that for you highlight what the new stack is capable of, particularly when companies recognize that it's work that's their mission and not location?
Yeah, there's a number of examples. I gave one earlier, but I think it's important to say that this stack isn't just about enabling traditional work models. It's about embracing new ones. And I think a very good example is Teleperformance, one of the largest business process outsourcers in the world, really optimizing and focused on providing call center service, contact center service for very large, some of the world's largest enterprises. They recognize that this is a moment for them to be able to scale their business, for them to be able to embrace new work models that simultaneously allow them to attract more talent and lower their costs. And so they're using this hybrid work stack, including not just a lot of the collaboration tools that we mentioned, but certainly specialized tools related to call center, and being able to virtualize that as well as their voice over IP services to enable a hybrid call center model, one in which they can equally recruit remote workers, stay-at-home workers, to support contact center efforts, as well as in call center, physical call center employees as well. And that really allows them flexibility, right? Some customers are fully embracing of this idea of the home force, being able to say, hey, look, I want to staff the call center with the best talent possible and at the lowest cost rate to me possible. And if that involves a home force of workers, I'm totally fine with it. You have others that are saying, hey, no, I still want to have physical call center support somewhere in one of your major locations. They have the flexibility now to do that. So they can deliver a higher level of service at a lower cost with a much more engaged and retained workforce than they could pre-pandemic.
Well, great. Tim, there's so much research and information, and people are so thirsty for new insights dealing with unprecedented issues. Where can they go to find out more? Where do you recommend they start their journey?
Yeah, I would recommend that they go to Citrix Fieldwork, which is our thought leadership platform in which a lot of the research that both I and Amy referenced today is available.
Amy, how can Nobody Makes It Alone help? Where are your resources located, and how can people learn more about finding the right path to a successful hybrid work?
I'd love to connect with anyone on LinkedIn. I also author a newsletter on LinkedIn, as well as the website, nobodymakesitalone.com, and look forward to being a thought partner and really help understand what's going to make your organization successful, no matter what happens in the world outside.
Well, great. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored Briefings Direct discussion on finding the best eventual use case, end state, and perhaps most productive approach to hybrid work. And we've learned how new forms of innovation, opportunity, and technology stack solutions can both empower workers and reward their employers with higher productivity, satisfaction, and innovation. So a big thank you to our guests. We've been here with Amy Hayworth, founder and CEO of Nobody Makes It Alone. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thanks, Dana.
And a big thank you as well to Tim Minahan, Executive Vice President of Strategy at Citrix. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thanks, Dana. Look forward to speaking again soon.
And a big thank you to our audience for joining this Briefings Direct Future of Hybrid Work discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of Citrix-sponsored discussions. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this along to your community and do come back next time.